Something I hear often is, how much can I borrow? Great question.
With over 10 years of experience, entrepreneurs from across the country come to Andrew Simon to solve their business challenges through the versatile and flexible application of SBA lending.
SBA loans are guaranteed by the federal government to offset risk and stimulate economic growth.
His expertise as a lender and a business owner gives him a unique competitive edge when consulting with prospective clients.
And then how did you end up in this specific niche, like funding small businesses all over the country?
It wasn't planned, I can assure you that.
So what have been your main takeaways and lessons learned that you would hammer out?
Timing's really important. That's the biggest takeaway I've identified.
In your words, in simple terms, like what is an SBA loan?
Yeah, so SBA stands for Small Business Administration. In the event a borrower doesn't pay it back, the lender receives a portion of that loan back.
Now, what about for a potential startup? Let's say that you're an executive or you work for a company, you know how a business runs, and you want to start your own business. Is there SBA funding for that?
So startup capital. So it depends what you're starting on. Some like franchises, some don't like franchises. Some like the restaurant industry, some don't like the restaurant industry.
One last question I'm curious about. So for those of us that grew up more conservatively and we were told that debt is bad, how would you address that? They have a business running and they've not considered using debt because they were taught that debt's bad.
Hey guys, I'm James Danley. Welcome back to the Bulldogs Podcast. Today we're sitting down with someone who occupies a very specific niche in the business world, small business lending. He's been in the business for over 10 years. He understands the ins and outs of small business and medium-sized business financing. He's bought and sold a ton of different companies. He's owned businesses himself over the years, several of which had over 100 employees. Very smart guy in the business world. So if you're getting in the entrepreneurial space or you're looking to understand how acquire funding to grow your business or start a business, this is the guy you're going to want to talk to. So we're going to have a great conversation with a friend of mine and a client, Andrew Simon. Thanks for coming in today, man. Appreciate it.
I'm glad we're here.
I know, me too, man. So the small business lending world, this is something that's so different and foreign, I think, to a lot of people. I think a lot of people that get in the entrepreneur space might even be hesitant of debt. They try to start and bootstrap themselves, right? And maybe not leverage debt to some extent because either it scares them or they don't have the financial acumen. So I'm curious, like, to give an explanation to the audience on kind of what you've done the past 10 years, who like your client base is, what you do in this entrepreneurial, like small business lending realm.
Sure.
And then from there, we'll kind of go back to like, you know, your beginnings and how you got in the space.
Yeah, that's great. I think it comes down to metrics and measurements. So when we look at a 10-year period, it's what do we want to accomplish and what do we want to achieve? My wife, Kate, is self-employed and she coaches on a variety of topics, and it's predominantly around measurements and understanding what's going on. So in the small business arena, what I've taken from that experience, listening to her and understanding what she's coaching to, is understanding what drives revenue, what drives expense reduction, knowing fundamentally what's important in a small business. So when it comes to leverage, there's a lot of things to take into consideration. Where would you like to start? What's a question you could ask that maybe a small business owner might be thinking about? Something I hear often is, how much can I borrow?
Sure.
Great question. Well, it comes down to the use of funds. How do you want to use the money, and what is it going to return, and how long is it going to be returning it? I think that's really the foundation of effort and efficiency, is setting good expectations for yourself, for your business. I think you hit the nail right on the head. Financial acumen is now more accessible than ever with the rise of different technologies, social media, access to individuals like yourself that are happy to consult and help in a variety of ways.
So talk to me about some of your past clients, man. Like generically, who are some of these small business owners that have learned how to leverage SBA lending? Sure. And like who's your client base? Paint that picture for us.
Yeah. So if we look at the clients, I think there's few ways to categorize them. I think the best would be by dollar size. So the above 500,000 and below 500,000 borrowers, and then how they're using the money. So I'll give an example. On the below 500,000, they're existing businesses, 2-3 years old and above. How they use the money that I lend is for refinancing debt for better cash flow or working capital. So cash towards marketing. It can be for adding new product lines. So it's operating capital to grow revenue. On the above 500, it can be people.
Who are some examples of that, like small business owners like that you've worked with? Give us some visuals. Like
We've got delis who make sandwiches or burger joints. We've got simple companies that just deliver sandwiches, So restaurants, manufacturers. I think the hardest industry is more service-based. Products are easier to finance in my experience. I think what's challenging in the service space is if it's not subscription-based, you don't actually know when your next sale could be coming. When it's product, you can kind of start to say, okay, this person runs out of paper every 6 weeks, and get them on a cycle. The same can be said for services, but certain services are easier to lend to than others. So different industries.
project cash flows, yeah.
Yeah.
So what about like people in the construction world? Any like contractors come to you for SBA lending at all? Because I feel like those guys don't even think about this a lot of times.
Yeah. So the SBA
Small builders.
is like there's different products within the SBA. Specific to what I do is the 7A product line. So there's small loans, there's working capital loans, there's lines of credit. So for a contractor, let's say you got a big project, $400,000, and you're buying inventory for the project, timber or whatever, or you need certain long-term assets like a certain saw or equipment. You can get a 10-year term, not just because of your current project, which we could look into it being projection-based lending, but you can use SBA financing based off of your historical performance or your projected performance financially. There's other criteria as well. So I have financed contractors in the past. The one that comes to mind right now, he's out of Florida, and he does like countertops, like solid surfaces. He pours concrete. He does like very expensive. I think it's expensive fabrication. So
Sure.
might do a custom countertop. The guy probably had about a 680 credit score on his FICO, 5 years time in business, did about 600,000 to 700,000 of revenue.
Okay.
Him and his brother ran it.
Pretty average small business. Yeah. Two guys.
Their experience, he doesn't have a degree in this, but his brother, has licenses. He had the right insurance coverage for issues. He also had business interruption insurance in the event something catastrophic happens. He's still able to cover his short-term obligations. He was a great candidate. He bought machinery, he bought equipment, he refinanced certain debts. We gave working capital. And then fast forward 3 years later, he ended up buying out a competitor. So you don't just have to get an SBA loan for one thing. You can pool other needs into one loan as well.
That's a great example. All right, so we got a small contractor that's doing countertop fabrication, $500,000-$600,000 a year in revenue.
Yeah.
Two guys. They came to you for funding initially for potential like line of credit almost for working capital.
They were looking for some cash to support their outsourced labor for a project because they were paid. They didn't want to use factoring. They didn't want to use a line of credit at the time. But the contract they had secured was an annual contract, or it was with a home builder. And they were putting in these custom countertops, about 14 or 15 in a year. And they wanted some consistency, saying, hey, it's cheaper if I buy all this inventory today. I know I need this. So they were finding savings in that. So they wanted to kind of stock up. And then
So they're acquiring materials essentially.
Yeah.
They've got a contract with the builder. They're going to do this number of countertops in the year.
Yep.
Let's go secure SBA financing. We'll buy in bulk, get a massive discount on the countertop material, stock it, and then use it throughout the year. That's a great application.
Yeah. And what they ended up doing, which was awesome, was they said, hey, you're building the same spec home, kind of, sort of. just make sure your countertop is this. I'm going to build 14 of them for you right now. Put them in a warehouse.
They're ready to go.
They're ready to go. Now we don't have this issue. Just make sure you're good. And the builder said, I love that. Build it. We'll pay you, because he was building, like, I don't know how his sales work, but he had the capital to pay him for that, and he gave a discount. So it was he took an SBA loan and found a way to increase revenue in like a 4-month period over a year. And he's got a 10-year term. And then he ended up coming back a couple of years later for more and saying, hey, I've got this loan, I can pay it off, but it's, at the time, it's a variable interest rate is what I offered him. It was very affordable for his situation. He said, can I do it again? I've got more builders that want me to develop other products for them. He ended up becoming a manufacturer of countertops.
Really?
Yeah, he does about 300-ish a year.
That's awesome.
And I gave him another loan in 2018 for some equipment that manufactures countertops instead of one-off custom bespoke. He would make a mold, and he just kept filling it with concrete and then do really great designs in it with like leaves or sticks or fossils. So he was making really cool stuff, and his brother was great at sales and found a market. So you can change your business with the type of financing you have, is something to consider.
That's a great story. So he leveraged SBA financing initially, first for material, then to actually expand the business. And then third, you said he actually acquired a competitor. So he used SBA financing then to buy another similar business.
Yeah. And his financials were great. He wasn't the most technically savvy. He wasn't, the most financially savvy, but he understood what drove results in his business. And he was looking at his cost of goods sold. He was looking at where he's sourcing his materials. So while he knew how to run the company, he wasn't the most experienced in what to change, what to modify. And that's what I encourage everyone to do, is saying, just because you know how to make the burger, maybe you should take some time to learn how to make the business. And he really focused on that aspect while his brother was doing sales, and he was optimizing his side of the equation so he could go a little heavier into other directions. So I think it's always important for people to realize that there's a lot to learn as you build your company, and it's okay to pivot and change. But knowing the metrics that drive your success are really important, not only in finance, but in many areas.
That was a great example. That helps visualize the type of business and like a standard American small business in any potential market. So your lending is not geographically located. Like, you can literally lend anywhere in the country. It's all based on business financials. It's an incredible niche. I don't know anybody else in the space other than you. So I'm curious, man, like, just to give the audience idea of like your background, like, kind of where you're from, what was your educational experience, or where'd you grow up? Like, and then how did you end up in this specific niche, like funding small businesses all over the country?
Yeah. It wasn't planned. I can assure you that. It wasn't like I woke up one day and said, I am going to be a lender. I think I'll start from, I grew up in Bloomfield.
Michigan, right?
Yep. Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. Ended up going to Purdue, graduated from there, sold garbage trucks out of college, all around the country, just traveling, selling the garbage truck.
Now, was that like a internship or like a first hire out of school, or how did that happen?
Right out of college. I went to the career fair. These dudes said, you want to sell garbage trucks? I said, I'll sell garbage trucks.
I'll sell it. I need a job out of college.
So I was like,
let's go.
Are they expensive? Because they look like trash. And he goes, they're very expensive. And I said, okay, let's go do that. I've never seen a garbage truck business go out of business for logical reasons.
That's a wild experience, man. So I didn't realize you build sales skills like that, selling garbage trucks out of the school. So you're targeting municipalities around the country?
And private haulers. I mean, my territory was the East Coast. So I'd start all the way up in Maine in their summer, and I'd get in a garbage truck and I'd drive around going down the East Coast, demoing a garbage truck. I mean, it was crazy. I started a Twitter. It was 2009. It's called the Wandering Garbage Truck Salesman. It was a unique, I feel like I was ahead of my time.
That's awesome.
I feel like it could have been something great. I lived with a coworker. I think he still works there. I mean, it's a cool industry. It's got great people. And those are small businesses for the most part, picking up garbage and recycling and other things. But it was a great place to learn. Had some great experiences.
How long did you work for them, and what were your like lessons learned and takeaways through that?
So I started when I was 22. I think so that was around 09. And around 2012 or 2013 is when I switched and went to go work for Michelin North America, selling tires to like FedEx and big fleet accounts like Walmart and Old Dominion. But in that experience, it's your first job out of anything. It's your first. I mean, sure, you can have other jobs that make money, but this was an actual, hey, maybe I can do this for a long time. Do I like the industry? So I think looking back at it now, I have a different take on what I've learned for sure. But at the time, what I was thinking was these garbage men, it's gold and it's not going anywhere. I remember sitting in a garbage truck in front of a landfill at 4:30 in the morning, seeing dozens of trucks coming in, dumping, or like going in, getting their truck for the day, because that's where one of the haulers was. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, how do you get into being a waste hauler? Like, how? No one grows up and says, I want to haul garbage. Like, seems like this is a really good industry. I'm just selling one piece of the industry to them, an essential piece. And then it kind of got me thinking, like, what is essential in business? And I ended up getting a master's in project management during that time while I was working there. And then it was just like, all right, get into marketing. Now let's get into the strategy of what drives success in their own rights. You can have a position of being, I don't know, you could be tire cleaner, but what makes you the best tire cleaner is whatever your clients love. So who are your clients and what do they love? And because everyone's got tires on their cars, but how do you make it valuable? So what I found was learning about the value of things was the biggest takeaway. What's important to clients, what's important to your bosses, what's important to yourself.
So what was key in selling garbage trucks? How do you get, like, I don't even know how many manufacturers there are of those. Like,
Oh yeah.
and so most of these guys are small contractors that get route contracts and then they have their own trucks.
There's a few ways they can go about, growing and maintaining and stabilizing their business. There's a bid system. There's other revenue streams in their business too, from rental of, I don't know, trailers or rental of containers. So, I mean, I don't know, to be honest, I don't have an answer. I think it comes down to customer service and following through with what you're going to say you're going to do at the time you say you're going to do it.
So when you hopped from that company then to actually selling tires, was there a strategic move behind that? Was it just pay increase? Like, what'd you end up learning in that second role?
Well, that's funny. I wanted to live in California at the time.
Oh, okay.
And I was living in Indianapolis and then moved up to Michigan for a little bit because I was traveling a bunch. And I worked for a buddy's company kind of in between because I was like, garbage is interesting. 25-ish. I don't remember how you.
This might be profitable, but I don't want to make a career out of it.
This isn't for me. I need to go explore. I need to find something else. And then worked for a buddy's company. And then Michelin saw what I don't know how it happened, but ended up getting a job there. Went through their training, and they ask, where do you want to live? And in a roundabout way, I just kind of said Southern California. And at the time, no one really wanted to go out there. So they 2 weeks later sign an apartment lease and getting that going. But I think it's cool to get outside of your comfort zone and explore other places.
Sure.
Because if you look around, everything looks great or not great, but there's no perspective. It's just what you've seen. Maybe if we go to California and see what they're doing, it'll change my perspective on where I'm at. So I thought it was really important to just get out there and just see what America's got to offer.
When you're young, it's easy to take that leap too.
Super easy.
So how long did you work for Michelin, and like, what was that role?
Oh, it was like a year.
Oh, it wasn't
yeah, it was. Yeah. I was asked to move back to Southern California or to Greenville, South Carolina for a different position. I was living in, Laguna, California. It's kind of a hard sell to, why don't you come on back?
Go back to the Midwest. You didn't want to leave.
Okay. So something I learned there is a lot of process, a lot of thinking further down the line. So understanding how everything's connected between your coworkers. They have a lot of processes, a lot of standards. And I thought that was really valuable. Understanding your role, how you play into the greater good of the organization.
So obviously you chose to stay in California. What was like the next position? Like how did you end up going through? It seems like these companies kind of had some similar themes as far as corporate strategy, logistics scope, which obviously then ties into some of the businesses you bought later on in life.
Yeah.
But what did that rest of that process look like that landed you into the lending world?
Sure. So I got scooped up by a company called LA Freightliner, which is now called Velocity Vehicle, or Vehicle by Velocity. So it was Los Angeles' largest privately held entity, or like most amount of employees, I suppose, outside of like a medical practice. They had truck dealerships along the West Coast. They were huge in Freightliner. They were expanding and growing. But I was interested in finance and I liked marketing. So they gave me a job in marketing finance.
Okay.
And we were all kind of sitting there talking about, we're selling leases and loans for equipment. Excuse me. And we started talking about other products, or other uses of funds. Why are we just financing the equipment or servicing agreements, insurance? Why are we financing just that? What if we financed other needs of our clients? What does that look like? And we ended up buying a SBA lender in Northern California. And
Interesting.
Wow, this is great. This is awesome. You have one product that can do so many things. And I felt that was the right move for me. So I jumped into selling those loans, like being I don't know what to call it, maybe a salesperson, but we didn't have branches. So how do you find clients? It's 2014, 15. And we just bought a bank.
It's wild.
And my background's marketing. I've worked with small businesses because what a lot of people don't realize is FedEx is predominantly contractor based for deliveries. And so I built up a network of FedEx contractors and I was like, hey, I can finance a business acquisition. I can finance your equipment. I can finance pretty much everything, kind of. And so I was focusing on financing FedEx contractors.
So this is essentially your third major role out of college.
Yeah.
You wanted to study and understand the finance and marketing, and they ended up acquiring a bank to do small business lending for their clients.
Yeah.
And that was almost experimental, and it ended up being a great fit for your skill sets. You loved it and got creative with the space.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the people I worked with. They were very excited to help their clients more. But it was a very transparent, very clear process of, we're new to this. We're trying to figure out certain things. You seem like someone who would repay the debt. We've got our credit appetite. We've got our credit philosophy. Let's figure out how to lend to you. And so
who were your clients at that point in time? Who were you guys servicing that you wanted to lend funds to?
You're going to laugh. I literally got on Yelp.com and looked in Los Angeles while I wanted to finance FedEx contractors because there was a FedEx terminal 5 miles down the road. There was only 30 contractors in that building. So great, there's 30 of them there. That's my client base. But how do I get to see them? They're there at 6:30 in the morning. The trucks are zooming around. Who knows where the owners are? So I was like, oh gosh, this is going to be a problem. So I started thinking, why don't I service where the contractors go? I was like, I know they go to oil change places. I know they go to these places, to get their needs met. So I started calling off of Yelp, oil change, tire places, service shops, everything relating to the FedEx contractor, and building a network around where the contractor goes.
So I didn't realize that FedEx uses a lot of subcontractors. Can you help us understand that better? How does that work with all the FedEx routes?
Great question. The FedEx delivery, as we know it today, it looks like FedEx, feels like FedEx, sounds like FedEx. These are third-party vendors. So if you look on the side of the truck, if they're coming to your house, you'll see the name of the company. So it could say Tommy's Transport. Yeah, it's got the FedEx logo, But Tommy's Transport loads the trucks sometimes, but they own the truck. They have a 1 year or so contract with FedEx to deliver in a designated territory. And I went on later, after financing them for 3, 4 years, 5 years, understanding that business, and ended up buying one and growing it, because I felt that being a contractor to a big company made a lot of sense. It's like a franchise, kind of, sort of, but ultimately, while FedEx is your only payer, your invoices come weekly or get paid weekly. It's really diversified with all the houses and businesses they deliver to. So unless something massive happens to FedEx, I felt like it was a safe bet. And after having worked with the clients that support FedEx, I had a better understanding of what I was getting myself into.
And most of those clients that you guys are working with that supported FedEx, those were all essentially like truck owners and vendors. Like this is like a distribution arm. So FedEx outsources and signs 1-year contracts, either for individual trucks or truck fleets, like a small company.
It would be fleets, yeah.
A fleet to service a certain geographic area.
Yes. Yep.
And then that contract renews every year.
It can, yes.
If they perform well,
Yep.
then they renew the contract.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And
so that's who your initial client base was that you guys started doing SBA loans for, was FedEx contractors.
That's who I was focusing on, yeah.
Interesting.
And the reason I liked it so much was the contracts are very similar. We can standardize our understandings of anomalies, like you're paid on package or stop or mile, or, the variables of the business are contracted. It's your only client. Where you can get a really good understanding of what the FedEx contractor profile looks like and understand the variables, like how far is your first stop? What time's your dispatch time? You can start to look at qualitative aspects as well as quantitative to make decisions. So while most SBA lenders are doing a very heavy financial analysis for creditworthiness decisioning as one of their components, you can also do qualitative analysis to design what makes for a good borrower. So things like, how long have you had credit lines established? How many have you had established? Certain ratios in the financials. So I'm more focused on the data points, not just the credit parameters. So understanding a business holistically, as opposed to what was your net income last year. Everyone wants a sure thing.
And that was a more creative approach to then help these small businesses get loans that most people in the industry were not doing.
Yeah. Yeah, it was really tough. Then there's another component when you're buying them, business valuations. These are small businesses. They're not typically working with high dollar CPAs, accountants, enrolled agents. Their financials might not be representative of the actual status of the organization. So understanding that component, saying, yes, we can ask for letters of explanation. So when you start to understand the small business community, you start to understand what drives cost reduction. You start to understand that it doesn't make sense to have 85% labor to revenue. Or you start to recognize that sometimes there's personal expenses on a business or one-time non-reoccurring expenses, how to find those. Understanding likelihood of repayment is essential. And I think understanding what the borrower's doing is essential too. And by that, I mean, how do they make money and how do they save money? So managing the spend is important. And it's very easy to just use debt service coverage ratio to determine if they're able to repay the debt. What's challenging is saying, hey, you've got a FICO score. What's part of that FICO score? That's your, history of credit. Well, there's other metrics. There's FICO SBSS. There's new ways to approach decisioning creditworthiness that takes a lot of investment and time to really become comfortable with making $1 million decisions. Some people think it's a gut instinct. Seems a little risky to me. But when you can start to draw the line between, hey, you got 5 full-time employees, you have 4 trade lines open in the last 2 years, you have some trends in the market. So maybe the market's growing and your market share is increasing. So when you start assessing who the business is, you get a better sense of their likelihood of repayment, not just lagging indicators, which are historical financials. You can use leading indicators as well.
That's interesting. So what I'm hearing is you took a very different approach to small business lending than the standards. People usually just look at the numbers on a piece of paper and say yes or no based on some basic benchmarks, I guess, financial benchmarks, usually in ratios. You took a different approach to understanding the business, how they operated, future projections, and then digging into, the financial profile a little more clearly to understand likelihood of repayment, and then help those small business owners achieve the goals they needed through acquiring SBA funds, essentially.
Yeah.
And to make sure they're running a profitable business and like cash flow is going to be good, saving was possible.
Yeah. And it really comes down to what is the business plan of the business. Access to these funds doesn't have to be constrained because your history is not in line with the bank's minimum standards. There is projection-based lending to say, this $100,000 I'm borrowing, I'm going to do it all in social media marketing. And here's how I'm going to do it. Here's my plan. Here's the likelihood of success. And here's why it's going to work. And understanding that, okay, we are open to this risk, but how do you mitigate that risk? So things like some loans have recourse with personal assets, if they're available or if the state allows for it. Or sometimes you don't have to put a lien on certain assets. Maybe you own a rental property. So there's ways to mitigate the risk as a lender if you understand your borrower, the borrower's business. And while there's a ton of nuances in every business, it comes down to understanding what drives value in the business. What makes them successful. Sure, it can be a person, but what's that person doing? Are they focusing on their tech, their other people? Who knows?
So it sounds like your creative approach to the industry gave you like a much better insight of small business mechanics, what actually drives revenue for these guys, what their real financial health is, future projections, how they run and operate their business, almost like a consulting type view.
Sure.
And so from that, you learn not only how to leverage the financing components to help them make their businesses grow and more profitable, but then you were able to take that and apply it yourself and then start buying businesses using these same debt tools.
Yeah.
How long of a period of time was it that you were in the lending space before you bought your first company?
About 3 years.
Okay, that's pretty fast, actually.
Yeah. I don't know if it was foolish, but it worked out. The hardest part of it was learning how to lead, learning how to be clear as a small business owner, and being okay with uncertainty. How long can you hold being uncomfortable?
So let's talk about that first business acquisition as a case study, because I think that people can grip on more visually when we talk about. So what was the first business that you bought leveraging SBA funding?
So I didn't use any SBA funding.
Oh, you just bought a business.
Yeah, I used the same mechanics used to assess as a lender would do for an acquisition. And there was other components, definitely, but I got seller financing, 80%.
Really? Okay, so you just took the same analytical tools, assessed a business, then negotiated seller financing. So what kind of business was it you bought?
It was a FedEx contractor.
Oh, it was a FedEx contractor. Okay.
So everything keeps going back to FedEx. I worked there selling tires. Worked for a dealership that sold their equipment, financed them. At some point, you become what you're around, I suppose. So I ended up becoming a contractor.
So how did you find a FedEx contractor that wanted to sell the business?
Sure.
And who is that profile? Why are they selling? And then what's the real value if the contracts renew every year? Like, talk to me about how you analyze that, and then.
Yeah. So certainty of income is very powerful. The way I looked at this was, after you do a lot of transactions, I made a spreadsheet with a lot of different attributes. So sorry about that. I thought it was
No worries, dude.
So I think I saw the thing was at like BBN in terms of my spreadsheet of how many columns I was going. And I was going through the financials. I was going through the number of employees. I was going through every metric I could have. And then I was finding the low common denominator. And it was, I want to make X amount of money. What does that business look like to make X amount of money? What needs to be there? So it was like, what's the age of truck? What's the working capital? What's the CapEx? What does it take to buy a business that's already running and just let it keep going.
So let's talk about the business for you. How'd you find out this guy wanted to sell? Who was the owner at that point in time? Why did he want to sell?
Yeah, so I went to bizbuysell.com.
Really?
Yeah. And I made a list of every broker in FedEx who's selling them.
Interesting.
And after financing a lot of them, I sent out like a spec sheet to each and every single one. And I was already working with many or most of them, financing their buyers for FedEx contractors. So I sent out a bid sheet and I said, if you find something that's between number of employees, if you have X amount of employees, if you have...
What was the number?
I think it was like 8 full-time and 4 part-time.
Okay.
So it was something in that arena. And if you're doing, about $1.1 million to $1.3 million revenue overall, that's great. And if your payroll, I gave all these ratios for what I wanted to see. I don't even know if they're right, but it made sense to me at the time. So it was like, I want to see 51% labor to revenue. I want to see fuel being 6% or 16% to revenue. So I tied everything back to revenue. And then I said, and then I want a seller to finance 80% of it. A lot of people said no. I think like 50 something said no. And then I said, okay, surely someone believes in their business enough. If I structure it right, surely someone wants to get out. And so what I structured it as was, this person makes X amount of money every year. Let's go to a CPA. Let's see what happens. How much do they actually make on this size of business post-tax? And when I realized they don't make as much as you think, I said, okay, I can do a 4-year term if I agree to pay this guy X amount. Well, why is he going to wait 4 years? What risk is he actually taking? What am I guaranteeing as a 27 or 28-year-old saying, I promise I'll pay you back? So what I realized was, people are more comfortable if you can create a business plan, you can create understanding of what they're doing, you can demonstrate who you are transparently so they feel comfortable with you. The SBA has a character component for financing. So I wanted to see, what does that look like in the actual real world? Like, how do you objectively measure that? And some people say, oh, payments on time, FICO score. But it was, what are the attributes of someone who's trustworthy? Why would someone bet $1 million+ purchase on a 27-year-old who's never owned a company, never ran a company, never delivered a package in his life? And what I realized was, you just got to stay in contact with the previous owner every day, as much as possible. Give him updates, give him a dashboard, give him something that gives him the confidence you're not just a passive investor. You got your eye on the ball. And I don't think without my previous experiences, I would even know what to look at. And that's what helped me.
So hold on. So in this situation, you have all these business brokers that sell FedEx franchise routes that you already work with, because you supply a lot of the SBA lending through a lot of these guys. So you come up with some dream parameters to acquire a route. You send to everybody. Most of them say no. They find one seller that wants to sell. Who is this guy? Why does he want to sell?
Yeah, his name.
Do you remember?
Yeah.
You don't have to say his name.
Yeah.
Like, what's the
Alan was a seller in Georgia.
Why did he want to get out of the route?
He wanted to retire.
Okay.
He did it like 20 years.
Nice.
And
so it's just time for him to get out of the business.
Yeah,
we
wanted to move and
want to get something out of it. So you structured essentially seller financing terms with him to buy him out of the route over a 4-year window.
Yep.
And you just presented the fact that you analyze the data, you understand how these businesses run, you fund a lot of them, you'd be trustworthy. So you gave him a 20% down payment. Was that from savings, or like how'd you?
Just cash.
Just cash.
Yeah. And
then so a business like that, you're saying you're doing $1.2 million in annual revenue.
1.37 million in revenue.
Got 10 to 12 employees, it sounds like.
Yep, and it was running Tuesday through Saturday.
What was the net profit on that business? You remember?
I don't remember. It's tough to say because I did a stock sale versus an asset sale. So I assumed all of his liabilities, all of them, and we agreed that he could take all the cash out of the bank. So it has to replenish operating capital. So it was tight. And then we also structured no payments for 3 months. and we closed September 1st, 2018. So it was like September, October, November. Sorry, it was 4 months. So we got through for me, it was really important when we buy versus just what we buy, because there's a busy season. So I wanted to have extra cash after the busy season. So no matter what, we had to figure out when's the right time to acquire. And it happened to be, for me at that time, it was September 1st. So I moved back July, I think early August. And 3 weeks later, I'm a contractor at 6 a.m. in the morning going to a couple of terminals.
Wow. So you bought this business, timed it with the busy season so you could recash up in the acquisition structure.
Yeah.
And you only had 10 to 12 employees. So how long did you own that business? What'd you do with it? How'd that look for your first acquisition?
So I had financed a couple people in the buildings that we were dispatching out of. So I was talking with them, understanding who he was as a seller. He was a great seller. He was trustworthy. He was transparent. He was honest. He was prepared to sell. He wanted to sell. There was no games. There was no negotiations, really. It was just, can you explain this to me? Doesn't make sense, yes or no? And he understood what he brought to the table, and he helped me a ton. He even flew back once to help me when, it wasn't always awesome. There was issues for the first year all over the place with staffing, with routing.
And these routes were where again?
So they were here in Michigan.
Oh, they were Michigan.
Yeah, so the broker was in Georgia. The seller was in Michigan. I was living in California.
Gotcha.
Okay. So I think I flew out in July.
So that was when you moved back to Michigan from California, was because you bought this business.
Yeah, and we wanted to move back. Michigan's a great place. It has a lot of good stuff going on. My wife's family's here. It just made sense for us.
Sure.
And ultimately, being okay with it's a lot of time, because I had a full-time job.
Because you're still doing business lending, right?
Yeah, I'm doing
full-time, and now you're running this other company on the side.
Got some rental properties too. It was just busy all the time. And what I didn't realize was how much goes in for the day before, preparing for a successful dispatch, staffing. I didn't understand. I thought people just did their jobs. I thought you just show up to work, you do your thing. If you got a problem or you're not going to meet expectations, you let everyone know. That's not the world.
That's not the world we live in anymore. Maybe that's the way it once was, but not anymore.
Yeah. So, I show up on the first day, I think 3 people quit. So I was like, all right, have a good day. And
so you immediately had to start making new hires then too, with roles that you weren't that clear at.
Hiring. Never stopped.
Wow.
Interviews every week for 3 years, because you're only as good as your people is what I believed. So constantly trying to get the, good coworkers is what I felt was really important. I think one year we sent out 178 W-9s. It was crazy.
Wow. Wait, so how many years did you own that business?
3.
Only 3 years.
That's
and
it.
You took it from 10 employees to 170.
128 operating. And then I think so it was crazy time. So to add some context, so it dispatched out of 2 areas. It was in Oak Park and in Auburn Hills, Auburn Hills. And these territories should dispatch from those, but these territories touched. It didn't make sense for them to be in 2 areas. So my territory changed. They said, hey, can you figure out with the other contractors a more efficient way?
FedEx asked you to do this.
They said, we want you to be 6 days a week instead of 5. Then it was, we want you to be 7 days a week. We don't want you to just be residential. We want you to be commercial and residential. We want you to run bulk trucks. We want you to all these crazy things. I said, okay, sounds good. And what I did was I went to the 3 buildings where my territory could potentially get moved to, because I was in 2, and replotted the whole, literally worked with every contractor to understand, okay, you're making X amount of money this year.
This is all the other FedEx contractors in the area.
Yeah, in 3 buildings, Livonia, Oak Park, and Auburn Hills. And we just had to sit down and figure out what is the best design and present it to FedEx. But I was the only one in multiple terminals. So I had to figure out, because I had the most to lose. I had just gotten this. 3 months later, there was all these changes. It was just a big math problem. So we said, all right, we understand how everyone's paid. It's all very relatively similar. Let's just not lose money, everyone. Let's just figure out the right territories. That's the most efficient. Let's get better.
How many owners were there total in that area?
So I would say out of the Livonia location, there was probably about 10 to 15 contractors. Out of Oak Park, maybe 25-ish.
That's a lot of people to get on the same page to restructure territories.
Yeah, it didn't work well for a long time. Everyone wanted the best of the best, but we all had to change. So I think everyone walked away frustrated many times because we weren't any closer, because we had a deadline of when things had, or FedEx was just going to say, all right, you get this, deal with it. So it was tough. And then, Oak Park or Lake Orion, Auburn Hills, maybe had 25, 30. So, we're trying to figure out how do we not lose money and operate efficiently. But at the end of the day, it's still FedEx's territory. They still ultimately decide how they're going to run it. And so I was, Warren, all the way from Warren all the way to Commerce. It was insane. So I shrunk the territories and got more dense and got all new equipment and said, all right, if we can't arrive at a decision, I'll buy you. And
So you bought a lot of the contractors out.
11.
Wow.
Yeah, in a 9-month period, because we weren't I had the most to lose. I had just walked into the arena. If I was the odd man out, it's a pretty simple decision of who they're going to change and what. If I'm the only reason this doesn't finish because I stand to lose the most, we had 16 trucks zooming around kind of because we were growing slowly. I realized if I just didn't get aggressive, I could lose everything or part of it or get something that's less desirable for the long term. So I started buying FedEx contractors.
Wow.
Literally, it was like 1 a month addition, and then it got out of control. The pandemic hit as that was wrapping up. So I had to downsize. So every quarter for 2 years, I was selling off the growth because truck availability wasn't as strong. Was trying to rent. I was growing not by design. I was just growing because it was, last mile delivery during a pandemic. So I wasn't in control of the growth, but I could control the shrink. And during that time, I was just thinking this can't go on forever. I can't be making long-term decisions to buy trucks, add people, investment in technology. So I just kept selling it. So every quarter would sell a piece of my territory to another contractor. And then after a year of doing that, you're debt free and you're, running 88 trucks daily. And before you know it, people are asking to buy your company.
Hold on. So let me make sure I understand this. So you're only a handful of months into acquiring the business in Michigan. FedEx decides they want to run you guys not just residential to commercial, different locations. So the whole region has to restructure. There's 40 some owners.
Yes.
Can't get them all on the same page before the deadline. So then you find a way to start buying out 11 of them and restructure the districts. And then in that process, you're buying contractors over a period of time and then new equipment. And then once they're running efficiently, then you're selling the pieces back off to the other owners that are still in the market.
In an open market and with other contractors or people who exist. So you can be a contractor without a route. You're just a vetted service provider. You might not have territories, but you're capable, or maybe you're waiting for the right territory to open up, or, whatever it is. You're a vetted vendor to FedEx. And I just asked for that list. I went to the terminal and I said, hey, this is growing out of control. I'm not in control of its growth. We've got some major issues. We're going to have growth pains. If you have anyone who wants to buy a part of my territory, just let me know. It was a lot of people. People were contacting FedEx all the time. There was a website, I think it was called buildabiz.com for FedEx, where you could become a contractor, then get a territory. And this is just in home and business delivery. There's other FedEx
And so the reason why you were selling off pieces is because you needed the cash to keep acquiring the others, and then also like growing the core business
Yeah.
and maintaining profitability. And then you did that strategically to where eventually you were debt free after what period of time?
So it took about 21 months. No, not
That's
even.
not-
It was
That's less than 2 years.
Yeah,
That's
19
fast.
months. So the first year was really hard and really expensive. So we get in, and I got my little baby territory out of 2 buildings. You know, it's like 4 guys here, 6 guys there, maybe. And then they said, all right, we're changing the territories. In fact, we're even going to change the buildings. And I said, oh my gosh, I just got into this. Like, these guys have been doing it longer, better. And so I started asking guys, hey, if we can't arrive at this, if we can't arrive at a decision, can I buy you out for, 2 times whatever you pay yourself, and I'll assume the debt? So if a guy made $100,000, I'd say, I'll pay you $200,000 and I'll assume your debt. And they said, sure.
And where'd you come up with the cash to do that?
Oh God, I'm trying to think. So the profits of the original one supported it. And then the reality was they wanted a 1-year contract. So there was no out of pocket after. So I'd maybe put 30, 40 grand down to give it to the seller. And then I'd say, I will pay you back as fast as possible. I will show you my bank accounts. I will show you my P&Ls. I'll show you my balance sheet. I'll be 100% transparent with you. My goal is to build equity versus cash flow.
So you were buying all these other ones on seller financing essentially as well, and
Yeah.
using the cash flow of the existing business to grow and expand it.
Correct. Yep.
And then you're able to flip off pieces of it to some smaller vendors at a higher price.
Yeah, because we knew its value. So
And then eventually you're able to keep the core areas that you wanted, and you were debt free inside of 2 years.
correct. Yeah.
And you had paid off the initial seller financing term. I thought that was a 4-year period.
Yeah, we paid them off in 3 years when I sold. Oh, no, we paid them off in a little over 2 years.
Wow.
So I kept making payments, which was painful, but ultimately, and there were other aspects of that debt too. So it wasn't just like, how much is the business? I had made other agreements with him too. Like, I wanted him to have health insurance. So I agreed to, here's the price of the health insurance. Here's what I think it is over the next 4 years. Hey, you have a 401k, you're a little bit earlier than using your 401k. We'll manage it for you in our system. Like, we wanted to figure out a way where he reaped the benefits of the work he's done for this long period of time. So it wasn't just getting the business at the right price. It was more focused on what's the overall end result the seller wants. And while he wants to retire, the cost of getting out early can be very expensive. And we knew what that number was. So if you've got $1 million and you're doing an asset sale and you got to recoup depreciation and all these other things that you don't really consider, yeah, you might be, if you don't do the right planning, your sale isn't worth as much. And I kind of learned that too when I sold, because 3 years is really hard. I should have waited a little bit longer, but at the time, the valuation of these businesses during a pandemic, I didn't feel like the ways these were valued were going to increase. So I had to make a decision whether to keep growing.
Because you guys are probably the busiest you've ever been during COVID. Everyone's shipping stuff during COVID. So like you're at the peak. That's why you strategically chose to sell.
Yeah.
So you went from like 10 to 12 employees to 120 something in 3 years. And then what did
9 months.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
And then what did you end up selling that business for at the end of the 3-year cycle?
So I sold it for a little under 100% of the revenue is the best way. So if you look at the dollar amounts,
Did you also sell it on seller financing terms, similar to how you bought it? Or
I did. I had to break it up 6 ways. So there were 6 buyers of it. Some had seller financing, some did not have seller, some were cash. So one guy got an SBA loan, one guy was cash, one guy was seller financing. Another was investments. So he just had, he raised a bunch of money from other people. And then the other 2 took out HELOCs on their house.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then I did some portion of seller financing saying, hey, like, no payments, like, this doesn't make sense. Like, I'm letting you know, none of this data makes sense. Like, I'll seller finance it. If you don't want it, like, I'm going to keep the money you paid me for the down payment. So let's make it a reasonable down payment, because the market was still going up and the ability to resell for like a 6-month period, there were still backup offers on every single tranche. So worst case scenario, it's very hard to crash one of these businesses if you're focused. So for me, it was, I'm selling pieces of it. And then when I decided that like, we're done. That's when I just said no more growth, no more reinvestment. And I was having a baby in 21, and I just said, I can't do all this stuff. Like, I gotta be focused on a few things. And I really like lending. So that's where I put 100% of my focus.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's really hard to do all these things and, have a family, a kid, can only do so much,
That's a wild testimony, man, to your operational skills and your financial skills to be able to like buy all those businesses, compile them, and then roll them out and sell them. So they're very, very impressive on the track record on that experiential.
I had a lot of support though too. I mean, it wasn't just, I had great friends and family, some really great coworkers and teammates. FedEx was helpful during that period. I don't know. It was a good recipe. It's not like I did it all myself, to say the least. I mean, we found this guy named Dana down in Texas that we flew back to Michigan. And I was like, all right, man, like, how are we doing this? Like, this is crazy. We are in a pandemic. What do we do? Like, how do we win through this? And so we put game plans together, contingencies. We were strategic with other people. We made, he focused on daily operations. I focused on effectiveness and efficiency of action. So you can't do it alone, or you can do it alone. You just won't get as far.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So let's go back to lending, because that's the core concept
Sure.
we want to talk about for the guys that are small business owners and entrepreneurs. So in your words, in simple terms, like, what is an SBA loan for guys that aren't aware? Now they've heard the story, your case study of like you doing small
Sure.
business lending at FedEx, you bought a business, grew it, scale it, and sold it. They want to learn more about lending. Like, talk about what is that in simple terms?
Yeah. So SBA stands for Small Business Administration. It is a government-backed loan. So that means a lender is incentivized by like an insurance policy. In the event a borrower doesn't pay it back, the lender receives a portion of that loan back. It's guaranteed up to 75%.
By the government.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
The federal government. So to get that guarantee, you have to meet certain standards. It can be FICO related. It can be, so there's guarantor, personal, your name, and then there's the business. So it's not like Andrew Simon is buying your real estate team. It's Andrew Simon's company is buying your real estate team. Most likely, if it's a asset sale, if it's a stock sale, it's different. So I think the important thing to take into consideration is the SBA is a credit enhancement focused on giving access to capital to people where lenders traditionally may not have that risk appetite. So it's not collateral based. It's more cash flow oriented. You can focus on startups. You can do franchises, expanding locations, buying locations. The SBA is really focusing on small business.
And what is that small business parameter? Like,
Oh, sure.
what does that look like? Like, how could you be too big to qualify for an SBA loan?
So there are size standards. There's revenue, there's employee headcount, there's a variety of ways.
Okay.
The best way to know is to go to the SBA's website. I don't know all of them because I'm very targeted in what.
And you said you were targeted at that 500,000 to 5 million
Yeah, for loan
range
amount.
for loan amount. Oh, that's the loan amount. Okay.
Yeah. So where I focused is building verticals and tranches and niches, just rinse and repeating, very similar in like transactions, and then figuring out how to expand that to different borrower profiles. So translating the FedEx, hey, we're buying 11 trucks with 17 people, working 5 days a week, making X amount of revenue. Who runs that? All right, that's what the borrower profile is. Well, where does that profile fit in other industries? Because if you're entrepreneurial, you don't have to be limited to one thing. You can build systems, you can finance those systems. So I wanted to see how many times can I work with a client. It's kind of important to me because most SBA loans, because they're 10 years and 25 years, probably won't see someone more than a couple times if you're lucky. Because if they're successful, they might not need financing in many business strategies.
So give us some more case studies, man, some more examples.
Yeah.
Outside the FedEx realm, like who are some of your other like client bases that you talked about? What business types?
Sure.
And then walk us through some examples on that.
Okay, so let me think of a couple of things. Oh, there's a movie theater in Lafayette, Indiana.
Okay.
Guy wants to refinance his property. Easy, 25-year transaction.
So why is he not going to like the local bank if it's a mortgage on a property to refi? Like, why is he going to you for SBA funding?
So he wanted to make renovations, and he didn't want to make a down payment. His equity was, he recently bought it about 2 years prior, and he bought it with a conventional mortgage or like a commercial mortgage, but his equity injection was 10%. And every other lender was saying, hey, we want to see you a little bit more. It's got seasonality. Our risk is a little high. So he came to an SBA lender to get that. Well, it's not fully secured because we're going to do construction, and we hope that increases the value of the property. It's projection based. We don't know.
And that's where traditional lenders didn't want to fund it, but with the SBA lending, you can actually get financing.
I think so,
based on future projections, and that's government backed, takes the risk profile off
of the lender.
The government does that because they want to see small business growth that drives the U.S. economy.
Yeah.
So these are specific tools that we have access to that most people don't really know about.
Yeah. So guy bought, owned or ran something for the last couple of years, wanted to refinance that note and do some renovations. Pretty simple.
Nice.
Another great profile is just if you look around your neighborhood, everything comes from somewhere, right? So clothing manufacturers, there's a lot of people who are buying inventory or textiles. It depends on what business of fashion you're in. So you could be a designer doing consulting services. You could be a manufacturer making shoelaces. You could be a retail shop selling, on Woodward. You could be an e-commerce store doing import-export where you buy here and sell to there. It could be selling to Canada. So there's different levels of guarantee that the SBA also has. There's an import-export loan where it's a 90% guarantee if a certain amount of sales is generated outside of the U.S.
Because then you bring revenue into the U.S.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
Interesting. I mean, what kind of it seems like we mostly consume. We don't necessarily produce and export. What kind of businesses are manufacturing here and selling overseas?
So I financed a shrimp, like they catch shrimp.
Really?
Yeah.
All right.
So this family, it seemed like they had something. One family member had something to do with selling shrimp, whether it was catching it, whether it was cleaning it, whether it was shipping it. But what was really cool was this guy's, called and said, hey, I need to buy a tugboat. And I said, there's boat financing. Go get it. He goes, yeah, I need working capital. I just secured a contract. I'm going to sell to this guy who wants, a bajillion pounds of shrimp. I was like, send me the contract. I want to see this. This is crazy. So his contract, it was kind of like a purchase order finance. That's one way. Startups are a little trickier.
So this is a small family business, and then he secured a contract because someone wants to buy his shrimp supply. Mm-hmm. So now he has a guaranteed buyer. He needs working capital to buy another boat and to expand the business.
Yeah.
And that's not something the traditional banks are usually lending on. So
seems like,
they come to you, the SBA, and you're able to then work the financial profile, help them.
Yeah.
show projections based on the contract, and then it's like, how much funding were they looking for?
I think it was about 1.6 million.
Wow, that's actually pretty substantial.
Yeah. So the boat's X amount, the working capital, the shipping it from, I think it was Florida all the way to California. Like, it was process.
Wow.
Because not all loans have one disbursement. There can be construction loans that you're funding vendors throughout the process. So you can build a building, and then you can even get, 100% financing with some lenders as well for, buying a business. Nothing out of your pocket is the best way I can put it. So there's a lot of different rules with different lenders with their risk appetite and their risk assessment. So there's the minimum standard that the SBA requires, and then the bank layers on top of that. So another good, interesting transaction I think I can talk about would be a guy making fanny packs.
It's a huge niche. Those are coming back.
Yeah, who knew? But he makes, I don't think he makes the fanny packs, but he retails them. So you could have any design you want on your fanny pack. You just send him a picture. He outsources it. You get it in like 6 weeks. So
Okay.
he wasn't buying inventory. He was buying website, web hosting, customer service reps. It was more of a tech play. But he had a history of success in other industries. This was 3 years old company. He took on a new partner who added capital and brought some strategic relationships for sales. And he was trying to just create an online retailer.
Interesting. How much funding was he looking for that?
It wasn't big. It wasn't relatively big. I think it was probably in the neighborhood of 450 to 550.
Okay.
Yeah.
450.
And we look at the total project, and I know that his new partner, wanted to apply funds for this partnership. So it wasn't just, hey, I'm buying 40% of your business. It's, I'm going to put money towards this project. I'm also going to guarantee the loan with you. Like, I'm in this with you. We now are 100% equal.
Partners, yeah.
So you can use SBA. We didn't even use the SBA loan for a partnership buyout. We used it for future revenue generation.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And in both these last 3 case studies you've given, you were able to obtain all the funding that each of those parties was requesting that they needed? Or were you guys only able to acquire part of it? Or
So not always what's asked is what's delivered, unfortunately.
Sure.
So there are reasonability metrics, like if you only need $300,000 to buy whatever, like we'll say your concrete manufacturing, you just need $300,000 to buy some trucks. Great. If you're asking for $1 million because you want $700,000 of working capital, we got to kind of look at what's going on, because that can pay the loan for X amount of time. Understanding the use of funds is really important. So I can say, knowing the drivers of success, how are you going to use the money? When is it going to be useful? Generally speaking, you're not funding a year worth of expenses with a bank's money.
Sure.
But in some instances, it is warranted. So I think the key takeaway is understand how you can use the money for your business, not what are the rules, because there are different, you don't even know all the rules of the SBA. That's what the lenders are there for. So knowing what you need to get done and how much you need to get it done with is important. So you can ask for more.
So how many different banks do you work with that do SBA specific lending?
Sure. So I'm a direct lender. I don't work with any other banks.
Oh, so you guys just fund all these loans yourselves?
Yeah, we're the lending source.
And that is your niche?
Yeah, that's all I do.
That's
SBA loans. And, we can do other stuff, but for me personally.
Now, the bank itself, is that the only niche that this bank specifically does? Is they do SBA lending, or they do other types of lending?
No, they do just financing. They do sponsored financing, which is like roll-ups of companies. Banks have a bunch of products and services. And I'm new to banking, by the way, so it's not like I'm an expert. So it's been really eye-opening to see what a bank adds value to businesses for. Where I work, we only specialize in business banking. So we offer products tailored predominantly to businesses. Now we have an acquisition that's completing in April where we're adding consumer banking products as well. And so that'll be exciting to see how we can, work with others.
That's wild, man. So I would say, I have a question. What percentage of the loans you do are for business acquisitions versus business expansion? Like, what are the categories? And
Yeah. So I would say prior to 2000, pre-pandemic, I think there's a break point, with the way the market works and where I had to pivot my focus. I'd say pre-pandemic, I'd say 85% business acquisition is what I specialized in.
Wow.
Yeah. And then the other pieces were partner buyouts, which is kind of like business acquisition to some capacity. And then I would say equipment finance, whereas the predominant uses of proceeds in the loans, over 50%.
But that was pre-COVID. Now, what does it look like?
For now it is, I specialize in small balance, so $200,000 to $500,000 loan sizes for working capital and debt refi of established businesses.
Okay.
We're kind of in that period of time where things, I'm optimistic. I think the business community is going to expand in small businesses over the next 4, 8, or 12 years. And I'd like to specialize on a dollar value that adds a lot of value to businesses. There's only so many business acquisitions a year, but there's 28 or so million businesses currently registered. Seems like they could use some working capital.
Now, what about for a potential startup? Let's say that you're an executive or you work for a company, you know how a business runs and you want to start your own business. Is there SBA funding for that?
Yeah, totally.
How limited is it? What are the amount? Are there limitations on the amounts? How does that work? Talk to me about getting startup capital.
So startup capital. So it depends what you're starting up. So different lenders have different industry requirements. So some like franchises, some don't like franchises. Some like the restaurant industry, some don't like the restaurant industry. Some require 25% down payment in the total project. Some require certain amounts of collateral relative to the loan amount. So for us, like currently right now, we're not doing startup financing. We're just resource constrained as we, finish up this acquisition of another bank and focus on the launch of some other things in SBA.
But there are some other banks out there that did do it.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
You got community banks, you got big banks, you got small banks, you got non-bank lenders. There's 14 or 16 of those. So
they're usually going to want some sort of capital investment where you've got skin in the game, and either you raise that from family and friends or you've saved it up, or, there's a number of ways to get that. And then it shows that you've got some skin in the game for a startup, or you've got a house or some other sort of assets and collateral that you can guarantee.
Clarifying question. Who would help liaison, finding a potential financial partner, a bank to do that? Are you talking to an attorney who or you develop these relationships with bankers yourself?
Sure.
How would somebody go about that process? Is just a lot of door knocking.
So to understand, how would someone help me understand your question. When you say liaison, how does...
Sorry, so I want to do a restaurant. Your bank doesn't really do restaurants, but this other one does, but I might not know that.
Sure.
How would I find that out other than maybe just a quick Google search?
Yeah. So you can go to the SBA's website. It's a process called Lender Match. The lenders who want certain criteria, you put in what you're doing, and it sends an email to 30 or 40 lenders that fit that criteria potentially. For me, I've never waited for people to come to me to get a loan. It's all relationship based. So I just kind of stay in my lane. And if it fits, it fits. If it doesn't, I recommend someone else because I probably can't deliver the best service.
Sure, but you know enough guys in the industry, you can probably point in the right direction. So let's talk about your primary client base then, since that's the target of today's discussion. Who are your ideal clients? Let's say, it doesn't matter if they're in Michigan or not Michigan, who are your ideal client bases that you're looking to connect with that you could help them grow and scale their businesses?
I think the best clients in my mind are ones that work with CPAs because they're invested in knowing their data. I'm not saying that others are not, but when you're working with great resources, it makes lending so much easier. So
as long as they're a small business, they actually work with a CPA firm, their financials are clear.
Yeah.
They're not working out of their receipt box and pads, right? It's legitimate business. They file taxes.
Exactly. So LLCs, sole props, S corps, those are great.
And then you're limited on the lending amount. So $200,000 to $5 million. What are the other business parameters to where someone can identify that they can come to you for a loan?
So On the above 500,000, it's called a debt service coverage ratio. And that ratio is your ability to pay the loan. Some want what's called a 1.15 DSCR. To do that, it's like an EBITDA calculation. So what you can do is, let's say you have $100,000 a year of payments. And let's say your business has a EBITDA of 115,000. You have a 1.15 debt service coverage ratio. Pretty easy. So there's that qualification. Another one is on the under 500, you can look at FICOs. Perhaps your FICO is above, 660 and above. That's a good baseline minimum to go talk to lenders about it. My ideal client, I would say, is someone who's looking to improve their cash flow, has debts between 250 and 500. It can be for anything. We're not refinancing SBA loans typically, but merchant cash advance refinances are great if they've got daily, weekly payments at higher interest rates. I think another good thing to finance is expansions, adding new locations or taking working capital to take a slight risk to increase revenue, perhaps putting more towards marketing or investing in training with your teammates, getting more certifications. I think having operating capital is really important in a business.
So if someone does get an SBA loan for operating capital, is that essentially structured like a line of credit where they can pull against it, pay it down, pull against it? It's open for an amount, or does it not work that way with SBA? Is it different than like?
Sure. So there's an SBA line of credit, and then there is an SBA term loan. What I offer are term loans. So if you hit the parameters of our credit.
And you can get a term loan for working capital just as you could a line of credit. Why would someone choose one over the other? What are the differences?
That's a tough question. So I like a line of credit for certain purposes, and I like working capital, and I like term loans for other purposes. There's a lot of variables that go into it.
Give me an example of
So
what you'd like for each one.
line of credit. Let's say you need, there's a great opportunity. You don't have enough cash in your bank. And this opportunity requires $300,000 to execute, like whatever it is. Maybe it's buy this inventory, travel out there, whatever it is. It costs you $300,000. So having an established line of credit gives you quicker access to it. In a term loan, I like it because you get financial benefits like tax benefits with depreciation, amortization, interest expense, but you have the capital today, right now, but you've got a plan for it. So I prefer more planned spending than capitalizing on opportunities. You can't always plan for opportunity. So having both is valuable. You don't have to be ready to use your line of credit right away. But in an SBA term loan, you're going to be using those funds the second you
Immediately.
because you start making principal and interest payments typically within the first month or two.
Gotcha. Interesting.
So different products serve different purposes, but ultimately it comes down to what are the needs of the business and what's your scope that you're looking down. Are you looking 1 year? My goal was to only own this FedEx thing for 5 years, but it was 5 years is how long I think it would take for me to get to where I needed to be. It happened in 3. We did it in 3. So it's hard to let go at times because you keep looking at that opportunity. You're debt free. But I had made a decision at that time that it was time to move on to something else. It had a shelf life. The metrics were hit. I would have embraced an SBA loan, but there are some things about an SBA loan that are not for me personally, but it's great for others. You'd sold me my home. So I would have needed to put a lien on that primary residence to secure an SBA loan. That's not for me personally.
Sure.
But for others it is. And so understanding your tolerances of risk as an individual is really important if you're going to get into business, because you don't have to have a plan for everything, but knowing your non-negotiables is pretty important Maybe you don't know them right away either. It takes time.
So what have been your main takeaways and lessons learned that you would hammer out from not only operating and growing a business and selling it, but from understanding the lending side and using capital and debt
Sure.
to accelerate growth?
Timing's really important. That's the biggest takeaway I've identified. You might have the best opportunity in the world, but if you're unable to break other commitments or other things, you got to focus on, is it the right time to capitalize on this opportunity? Just because it's present doesn't mean you have to do it. And when we look at financing from that, certain things aren't the right time to finance. If you have a snowplow business and, it's August,
The wrong timing.
maybe it's not the right time, but 3 months, maybe it is. So understanding when the right time to do certain things is really important.
How long does it take to apply for an SBA loan and get funding?
So there are different products in the SBA. The traditional, above 500,000 application is complicated because different lenders have different processes and there's different phases of the approval. So you could have, technically every approval is conditional, but what conditions are part of that approval? So it could be review of documentation. I think it takes a few hours to apply because you have to collect the documents. That's the hardest part. Tax returns, P&Ls, balance sheets for the over 500,000. So I would say filling out an actual credit application, like 5 minutes. Creating projections if needed, however long it takes you. Having your tax returns, being prepared to apply. So I would say take 30 minutes, read what's required, and then prepare to apply. And then ask the tough questions of the lender. Here's my situation. Meet the lender. Not all SBA loans are created equally. So certain applications are worth the work while others aren't. This is the best way to put it. So I'd say 2 weeks for an approval is pretty typical in the SBA world. Certain products are, I have an under 500 product that same day. Application takes 4 minutes. It's so easy because we're doing things a little bit differently, still adhering to risk assessment. That's very creative, but very, very strong. So you can range from, a 5-minute application, uploading a few documents, to a 3-hour application because you don't have anything, you don't know what it is. I would say a good benchmark is 2 months from start to finish.
Okay.
Approval takes 2 weeks.
So if you're the snowplow business, you need to be applying in October, probably
Yeah.
for December.
Yeah. So use of proceed in dollar size dictates a lot. And I think you don't know until you try. You might not get it the first time because that bank doesn't like your profile or risk. So using loan brokers is a great option. Using marketplaces are a great option. There's a whole new way to get SBA loans. It's not just by going to the bank.
Well, I know we were limited on time, man. I think we're getting close to that cutoff that we had talked about. Where can people contact you that are interested in potentially growing their businesses?
Sure. I would say the best is my cell phone.
Okay, there you go.
9 to 4 Eastern Standard Time, 317-777-0038.
Okay, cool. And Luke can tag you. Any social media profiles you want people to tag you on, or no? Just text or call you?
Just text or call.
Okay.
That's the best way.
Awesome, man. I appreciate you spending time today. I mean, there's so much in this small niche. It's mind-blowing to me.
There's a lot.
One last question I'm curious about. So for those of us that grew up more conservatively and we were told that debt is bad, how would you address that to the young, startup entrepreneur or small business owner, maybe that started grassroots, and they have a business running and they've not considered using debt because they were taught that debt's bad?
I'm a lender. I think debt is the opposite of bad. And the best way I can communicate that is look at what debt can do for you. The risk is what needs to be understood. So if you're bad at assessing risk, you probably shouldn't take it. I think the leverage is a very powerful way to expedite things, but I think it's very powerful to begin to understand what moves your business. So no one wants risk, but that adage of risk versus reward, I would say if you go through the process of determine if it's bad for you anyways, but if you go through the process of preparing to get a loan, I think you'll learn a lot about your own organization. So find the way to make it good. Maybe debt is bad for your company. Totally get that. But going through the process of understanding what's good and bad for your company is important. So having someone determine your credit worthiness on a loan is good. Maybe taking on debt today is bad for you. It's all about timing.
What's the range of the interest rates on these type of loans?
Sure.
Low to high.
So it's a variable interest rate or fixed interest rate. The variable is based off of Wall Street Journal prime rate, which is in the low 7s today. Different dollar values have different interest rate potentials. So, a $50,000 variable interest rate could be Wall Street Journal prime plus 6.5, worst case scenario. So you're looking at, worst case 14%, let's say, like on the high side. Or you can get a prime rate, prime plus a quarter, prime plus a half. Those rates are not just in response to the risk. They can be relationship based, exposure with the bank and other regards. Rate is no longer just an indication of your risk. So lows, looking at mid 7s, highs, 13, 14s.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Very helpful.
Now there's other SBA loans too, called the 504 for real estate, just for real estate purposes. Those vary too. So they have lower rates. They require different down payments. Ultimately, the SBA is like a house of different programs. Different products do different things. And 7A can do similar things as a 504, but it's kind of like going to the grocery store. Different ingredients create different end results. This is just access to capital. So understanding, you don't have to know the program, you don't have to know what else is out there, but really understanding what's in your company's best interest is the most important thing, I think.
That's awesome. Andrew, it's been a pleasure, man. I appreciate the insight into this world, and all of the conversation and the case studies. It's really enlightening for sure.
Happy to help. Thanks for having me today.
No, I appreciate the time. Guys, I'm James Danley. Thanks for stopping by the Bulldogs podcast. Hopefully you learned something today. Andrew's info is below in the description. Feel free to reach out to him for any SBA questions and to grow and scale your business leveraging small business loans. So appreciate you guys. See you next time.